I will have anyone removed who is filming. Put your phones away now!
Cop lied about black woman in court. She was an FBI agent investigating him. She had a calm, confident demeanor, but underneath, she carried a sharp mind that never let even the smallest detail slip by. From a young age, she had dreamed of serving justice, inspired by her father, a retired detective who always told her, "The truth matters more than anything, Tamara. Never let anyone hide it." That lesson had guided her life, shaping her into the professional she was today. Her latest assignment was one of the most challenging of her career. A local police officer, Daniel Reed, had come under suspicion for corruption. Rumors suggested he had been taking bribes, covering up crimes, and manipulating evidence. The community had whispered about his actions for years, but proof was hard to find. For Tamara, this case was not just a job. It was a chance to hold someone accountable who had broken the law while wearing a badge. Tamara spent weeks gathering information before even stepping into the city where Reed worked. She studied his routines, his habits, the people he trusted, and the places he frequented. She made a detailed timeline of his daily activities, cross-referencing public records, social media posts, and community reports. Every evening after hours at the office, she sat at her desk with multiple screens open, mapping out connections and identifying gaps in his story. Despite her careful planning, she knew one mistake could blow her cover. Being a black woman undercover in law enforcement, she understood the added scrutiny she would face. Biases, assumptions, and prejudice were obstacles she had learned to navigate early in her career. Yet she never let them stop her. In fact, they made her more determined. She often reminded herself that her identity was not a weakness, it was her strength, giving her a unique perspective that many in law enforcement overlooked. When she finally arrived in the city, she assumed a role that would allow her to observe Reed without raising suspicion. She joined community programs, volunteered at local events, and attended public safety meetings. In these settings, she quietly took notes, recorded conversations when legally permitted, and watched Reed interact with his peers and the public. On the surface, she appeared to be just another resident, engaged and friendly, but in reality, she was working tirelessly to build a case. Reed, on the other hand, was everything Tamara expected him to be from the reports she had studied. He was charming in public, quick with a joke, and always willing to shake hands or smile for the cameras. Yet behind closed doors, he was controlling and secretive. Some of the officers around him seemed intimidated, others clearly loyal. Tamara had to navigate carefully, understanding the dynamics at play without revealing her true purpose. Every interaction she had with Reed, every casual conversation, was a piece of the larger puzzle she was slowly putting together. Her first encounter with him at a community meeting had been uneventful but telling. Reed had greeted her politely but had a calculating look in his eyes, the kind that immediately put her on alert. She noted his body language, the way he scanned the room, the subtle nods to certain people, and the dismissive gestures toward others. Each observation added to her mental map of his behavior. She realized that he was used to controlling the narrative around him, and any challenge to that control made him uncomfortable. Tamara also had to manage her own emotions carefully. Working undercover was stressful, and the long hours alone in her apartment reviewing evidence, drafting reports, and planning her next steps could take a toll. She often reminded herself of why she was there, not for recognition, not for fame, but to ensure that justice was served. She kept photographs of her family on her desk and wrote letters to herself about her goals, maintaining a personal connection that reminded her she was more than her job. The city itself presented challenges as well. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and gossip traveled quickly. Tamara had to blend in, attend local gatherings, and create a persona that seemed natural. She chose simple, approachable clothing, learned about local customs, and even picked up subtle ways of speaking that made her less noticeable. Every day was a careful performance, balancing authenticity with secrecy. One afternoon, she observed Reed leaving a local cafe. He seemed distracted, glancing around nervously as if expecting someone to be watching. Tamara followed at a discreet distance, careful not to draw attention. She noted the license plates of cars nearby, the pedestrians' reactions, and any unusual behavior. Later, when she reviewed the footage from her body camera and notebook, she realized that Reed had met with someone in private, a meeting that was not on his public calendar. This could be an important lead. Tamara also built relationships with people in the community who were willing to share information without knowing her full role. She listened to their stories about Reed, the complaints that had been ignored, and the fear many felt in speaking up. These accounts gave her context and insight that official reports could not provide. She carefully documented everything, ensuring that she had a clear record that could support her case in court. Despite the tension and pressure, Tamara found small moments of relief. She loved walking through the city streets in the evening, observing life around her, the children playing in the parks, street musicians performing, and neighbors chatting on their porches. These moments reminded her why her work mattered. She was protecting people who could not always protect themselves, and that gave her strength. Weeks turned into months, and Tamara's investigation slowly began to uncover patterns. She documented instances where Reed had misused his authority, moments when evidence was mishandled, and cases where bribes had clearly influenced outcomes. Each piece of information was a small victory, a step closer to holding him accountable. Yet she knew that the biggest challenge was still ahead, bringing the truth to court and facing an officer who would lie to protect himself. Through it all, Tamara remained disciplined. She kept a strict routine: early mornings for physical training, mid-mornings for research, afternoons for field work, and evenings for reflection and planning. Her life was a constant balancing act, managing personal well-being while staying committed to the investigation. She often thought of her father's words, reminding herself that the truth was worth the sacrifice. The first part of her investigation set the stage for everything to come. Tamara had learned Reed's habits, identified his weaknesses, and gathered critical evidence that could later expose him. Yet she also understood that this was only the beginning. The court proceedings, the testimonies, and the exposure of his lies would bring an entirely new level of challenge. She had to be ready, not just as an agent, but as a witness in a system that was often unpredictable. As she prepared for the next phase, Tamara felt a mix of determination and apprehension. She knew that facing Reed in court, even indirectly, would be tense and potentially dangerous. But she also knew that the work she had done could change lives, not only by holding a corrupt officer accountable, but by inspiring others in law enforcement and the community to stand up for truth and justice. Every day, she reminded herself of her mission. She was not just gathering evidence. She was protecting the integrity of the law, ensuring that no one, no matter their position or power, was above accountability. And in that commitment, Tamara found purpose, courage, and a quiet confidence that, no matter what happened, she was exactly where she needed to be. The day of the preliminary hearing had finally arrived, and Tamara Williams felt a mix of nerves and determination. She knew that everything she had worked for over the past months would soon be tested in a public setting. The courthouse was busy with people shuffling through the halls, attorneys speaking in hushed tones, and officers moving with practiced efficiency. Tamara took a deep breath as she entered, reminding herself that she had prepared carefully and that her work had been thorough. Officer Daniel Reed was already there, sitting confidently at the front of the room, surrounded by his attorney and a few supporters. On the surface, he appeared calm and in control, but Tamara had seen enough to know that his confidence was often a mask. Behind that smile was a man skilled in manipulating perceptions and bending situations to his favor. She watched him closely as he exchanged nods with people he knew, his eyes occasionally scanning the room as if calculating everything around him. Tamara had not yet revealed her true role in the investigation. Her identity as an FBI agent remained confidential. She had to observe, report, and be ready to provide evidence without compromising her cover. Sitting quietly in the back, she kept her notes close and reviewed her mental checklist. She knew that Reed had already told a version of events that painted him as innocent, and her task was to quietly gather the truth and ensure it could be revealed when the time was right. The hearing began with formalities. The judge reviewed the charges and listened as attorneys presented preliminary statements. When Reed was called to testify, Tamara felt a twinge of anxiety. She knew that he would attempt to control the narrative and present a story favorable to himself. What she didn't expect was how confidently he would lie. "I have never interacted with the woman they are mentioning in this case," Reed said, his voice steady and practiced. "I have no knowledge of her, and I do not believe she has any involvement in my professional matters." Tamara's heart sank slightly. He was referring to her, though he did not know she was actually observing the case undercover. His statement was meant to discredit anyone who questioned him, including witnesses and investigators. The courtroom reacted subtly, some nodding in agreement, others frowning with skepticism. But Reed's polished demeanor made his words seem credible at first glance. She reminded herself that she could not react or reveal herself. Her training had prepared her for this, and she focused on noting every detail: the tone of his voice, the gestures he made, and the way his attorney reinforced his statements. Each subtle cue was part of a larger puzzle, evidence of his attempts to manipulate the truth. As the hearing continued, Tamara observed the reactions of others in the room. Some of the public seemed persuaded by Reed's confident words, while the prosecution team exchanged concerned glances. She knew that public perception could be as important as the facts themselves. Reed was skilled at presenting himself as trustworthy, and many people in the community had already been influenced by his image as a respected officer. Tamara thought back to the months of investigation. Every meeting she had attended, every note she had taken, every hidden camera and recorded conversation had been aimed at proving exactly what Reed was trying to deny. She felt the weight of responsibility. She had to ensure that the truth was not lost in the courtroom, that justice would not be delayed by lies and manipulation. During the cross-examination, Reed's attorney worked hard to cast doubt on the credibility of witnesses. They questioned motivations, suggested misunderstandings, and emphasized any gaps in the investigation. Tamara could see the strategy clearly. They wanted to make the case seem uncertain and unreliable, but she remained focused on the bigger picture. Every time she caught Reed contradicting known facts, she mentally recorded it, knowing that this information would later help dismantle his claims. Outside the courtroom, news reporters had begun to gather, sensing a high-profile case. Tamara knew that public attention could be both a challenge and an opportunity. She had to remain professional, careful, and focused on the task at hand. Any slip could jeopardize the investigation or expose her identity prematurely. The tension in the room was palpable. Witnesses who had been hesitant to speak out were now visibly nervous. Some whispered among themselves, while others took deep breaths, preparing to share their accounts. Tamara observed all of it quietly, noting how fear, respect, and loyalty all played roles in the unfolding drama. She understood that Reed thrived in controlling these emotions, and her challenge was to show that the truth could not be hidden by confidence alone. As the day progressed, Tamara noticed something interesting. Reed's statements were polished but evasive. He avoided specifics and relied on generalities that could sound convincing, but didn't actually refute the evidence gathered against him. Tamara realized that if the prosecution could expose these evasions with concrete evidence, it would severely weaken his credibility. She made mental notes of every instance where he spoke vaguely or contradicted previously recorded facts. Despite the stress, Tamara remained composed. Her training emphasized patience, careful observation, and strategic thinking. She knew that winning this case would not come from confrontation in the moment, but from a careful presentation of truth, supported by evidence she had meticulously collected. Every detail mattered, and she was prepared to use everything at her disposal when the time came. During a break, Tamara stepped outside the courtroom for a moment of reflection. The cool air was refreshing, and she took the opportunity to clear her mind. She thought about the families in the community who had suffered due to Reed's alleged corruption, about the integrity of the justice system, and about her own role in upholding that integrity. These thoughts strengthened her resolve. She was not there to intimidate or to seek recognition. She was there to ensure that the law served the people, not just those in power. Returning to the courtroom, she watched as the prosecution began to outline their strategy. They introduced documents, emails, and records that contradicted Reed's statements. They highlighted patterns of behavior, financial transactions, and communications that demonstrated clear misconduct. Each piece of evidence was methodically explained, slowly building a picture that challenged the officer's carefully constructed image. Tamara noticed the subtle shifts in the courtroom. Some jurors leaned forward, interested and attentive. Others exchanged glances that suggested doubt had begun to creep into their minds. Even Reed, despite his outward confidence, showed small signs of tension. A slight frown, a hand clenching the table, a fleeting hesitation before answering questions. Tamara noted these reactions carefully. They would be important in understanding how his lies were being received. As the hearing neared its end, Tamara reflected on the months of work that had led to this moment. Every undercover observation, every recorded conversation, and every meticulous note had been part of a long journey to uncover the truth. She understood that the next steps would be even more challenging, testifying, presenting evidence, and navigating the courtroom while maintaining her anonymity. But she felt ready. She knew that she had prepared as thoroughly as possible, and that gave her confidence. Finally, the judge called the hearing to a close. Reed maintained his composed demeanor, but the evidence presented had sown seeds of doubt about his credibility. Tamara left the courtroom quietly, knowing that the real challenge was still ahead. The preliminary hearing had been a test, a first opportunity to observe Reed in a formal setting, and it had revealed both his strengths and his vulnerabilities. Outside the courthouse, the city seemed to hum with anticipation. Tamara walked through the streets, observing the everyday life of people unaware of the drama unfolding behind the courtroom walls. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her work was moving the case forward, even if the results were not yet visible to the public. Every step she had taken, every detail she had recorded, was part of a larger mission to ensure justice. That night, back in her small apartment, Tamara reviewed her notes again. She carefully organized her observations, highlighting contradictions in Reed's testimony and preparing for the next phase of the investigation. She knew that the courtroom was a battlefield where truth and lies clashed, and she needed to be ready to defend the truth with precision, patience, and determination. As she prepared for bed, Tamara reflected on the challenges she had faced. Being an undercover agent was not just about gathering evidence. It was about maintaining composure, observing without interference, and navigating complex human dynamics. She understood that this case was about more than one corrupt officer. It was about protecting the community, upholding the law, and demonstrating that integrity could prevail even in the face of deception. Tamara fell asleep that night with a sense of purpose. The preliminary hearing had shown her the obstacles ahead, but it had also confirmed the importance of her mission. Reed's lies had been exposed, at least partially, and the foundation for justice had been strengthened. She knew the next steps would be critical, and she was ready to face them with the same dedication, intelligence, and courage that had guided her every day of her career. The tension in the courtroom had reached a new level as the case progressed. Tamara Williams sat quietly in the back, observing every move, every expression, and every word spoken. She had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, documenting behaviors, and building a clear understanding of Officer Daniel Reed's actions. But now the stakes had increased. Reed's lies had carried him this far, and it was time for the truth to emerge in a way that could not be denied. The prosecution began presenting more detailed evidence, showing inconsistencies between Reed's testimony and records from his work, financial transactions, and communications. They had meticulously compiled emails, phone records, and witness statements that highlighted patterns of behavior, bribery, and cover-ups. Every document was carefully explained, connecting Reed directly to actions he had tried to deny. The courtroom felt heavy with anticipation as the judge and jurors listened closely, absorbing the information. Tamara noticed the subtle changes in Reed's demeanor. He had been confident before, relying on charm and public trust to carry him, but now he appeared tense. His hands shook slightly when he held his notes, and he occasionally glanced at his attorney with an anxious expression. The walls of deception he had built around himself were beginning to crumble. Tamara knew that this was the turning point, the moment when the evidence she had painstakingly collected could finally have its full impact. The prosecution then requested a private session to introduce a new piece of evidence, a collection of recordings from an undercover investigator whose identity had been hidden for security reasons. This was Tamara, though she still had to remain officially anonymous. Her colleagues had coordinated carefully to ensure that her involvement would be revealed strategically. When the recordings played, the courtroom grew silent. Voices caught in whispered gasps, and some jurors leaned forward, captivated by what they were hearing. The recordings captured Reed engaging in conversations that directly contradicted his earlier statements in court. He had discussed bribes, influenced outcomes in cases, and even attempted to intimidate witnesses. The evidence was clear, undeniable, and supported by multiple sources. For the first time, the weight of the truth was fully visible to everyone in the room. Tamara felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had worked in the shadows for months, and now her efforts were finally showing results. The prosecution then made a bold move. They revealed that the undercover investigator who had gathered the recordings was an FBI agent. Tamara's identity was disclosed carefully, with all safety and protocol measures in place. The room reacted with surprise. Some people gasped, while others simply stared in disbelief. Reed's confident demeanor faltered almost immediately. The officer who had tried to manipulate the court and discredit others was now facing the undeniable fact that he had been observed and recorded by a professional law enforcement agent. Tamara stood, her composure intact, though her heart raced. She had rehearsed this moment mentally countless times, knowing that her appearance in the courtroom would change everything. She explained her role in the investigation calmly and clearly, detailing the process of gathering evidence, documenting Reed's behavior, and ensuring that the truth could be brought to light. Every word was deliberate, precise, and professional. Reed's attorney attempted to object, claiming that revealing Tamara's identity could compromise the investigation or violate protocol. However, the judge allowed her to continue, emphasizing the importance of transparency and the credibility of the evidence. Tamara continued, walking the jury and the courtroom through the steps she had taken, the methods used, and the careful attention to accuracy. She emphasized that every action had been legal, documented, and part of the official investigation into corruption. The courtroom was captivated. For months, Reed had relied on his public image, charm, and lies to protect himself. Now those defenses seemed flimsy. Witnesses who had been hesitant before began to show renewed confidence, encouraged by the revelation that a trained investigator had been carefully monitoring the situation. The shift in energy was noticeable. Uncertainty began to replace the confidence Reed had projected for so long. As Tamara detailed the recordings, the emails, and the documented patterns of behavior, Reed's composure continued to falter. Small signs of nervousness became more obvious. A tightened jaw, fidgeting fingers, and quick, distracted glances toward his attorney. The man who had once commanded the room with his confident smile now struggled to maintain even a semblance of control. Tamara remained calm, professional, and unwavering, a stark contrast that only made his unraveling more evident. The prosecution highlighted one particularly important recording. It captured Reed attempting to persuade another officer to alter an official report to protect a suspect who had connections to him. The conversation was clear, precise, and left no room for interpretation. The evidence was indisputable. The courtroom audience reacted quietly at first, then murmurs spread as the gravity of Reed's actions became impossible to ignore. Tamara also explained her method of remaining undercover in the community. She detailed how she observed Reed without raising suspicion, built relationships with witnesses, and gathered information in a legal and ethical manner. The jurors could see the depth of her professionalism, the care taken to ensure accuracy, and the importance of integrity in law enforcement. It was evident that the investigation had been thorough, deliberate, and fair. Reed's attempts to discredit her were futile. Every lie he had told, every manipulation he had attempted, was now contrasted with concrete, documented evidence. The prosecution carefully cross-referenced his statements with Tamara's recordings and observations, demonstrating inconsistencies and intentional deception. The courtroom atmosphere shifted further, with jurors, observers, and even the judge beginning to recognize the extent of Reed's misconduct. Outside the courtroom, news crews had begun reporting on the revelation. The story of a black woman FBI agent uncovering a corrupt officer captured public attention. Social media buzzed with discussions about integrity, accountability, and the courage it took for Tamara to risk exposure for the sake of justice. The case was no longer just about one officer. It had become a symbol of the importance of honesty, transparency, and professional dedication in law enforcement. Back in the courtroom, Tamara remained composed. She understood the significance of her presence and testimony, but focused on the facts. Every word, every explanation, and every piece of evidence was presented to ensure that the truth could not be denied. She had learned through years of training that emotional displays, however natural, could distract from the strength of evidence. Her calm, deliberate approach made the impact of the revelations even stronger. Reed's credibility collapsed further when multiple witnesses corroborated her observations. They had initially been afraid to speak, worried about retaliation or disbelief. But seeing a trained FBI agent validate their concerns gave them the courage to provide statements confirming Reed's behavior. The courtroom heard story after story, each supporting Tamara's findings and demonstrating a clear pattern of misconduct. The turning point became undeniable when the prosecution summarized the evidence. The combination of recordings, witness testimony, and detailed documentation left no room for doubt. Reed's prior statements in court were proven to be lies, and his attempts to discredit witnesses were clearly part of a deliberate effort to manipulate the system. The jurors listened intently, absorbing the full weight of the situation. Tamara could feel the sense of relief and justice beginning to emerge. She had worked in secrecy for months, facing the challenge of observing a powerful individual while remaining hidden. Now, that work was paying off. The truth was visible, tangible, and undeniable. The man who had thought he could manipulate reality for his benefit was finally being held accountable in front of the law. The judge called for a short recess, allowing everyone to process the developments. Tamara remained calm, reviewing her notes and preparing for any further questioning. She understood that the case was not over, but the most critical turning point had been reached. Reed's lies had been exposed, and the foundation for justice was firmly established. During the recess, she reflected on the months of work that had led to this moment. The long hours, careful observations, and dedication to truth had all culminated in a public, undeniable revelation. She felt a sense of pride, not in personal recognition, but in the fact that justice was being served. The community, the legal system, and the integrity of law enforcement all benefited from her efforts. Returning to the courtroom, the tension remained high. Reed's attorney attempted to regain control, but the momentum had shifted decisively. The jurors, witnesses, and public understood the significance of the evidence presented. Tamara's professionalism, clarity, and courage had transformed the proceedings, ensuring that lies could no longer dominate the narrative. As the session concluded, the judge emphasized the importance of truth and accountability. Reed's behavior, now fully documented and corroborated, would have serious consequences. The courtroom had witnessed the impact of integrity, courage, and diligent investigation. Tamara's presence and careful work had made it clear that even powerful individuals could not escape the reach of justice when facts and truth were carefully documented and presented. Tamara left the courtroom that day with a deep sense of fulfillment. The turning point had been reached. The lies that once shielded Reed were no longer effective. The evidence, her careful observation, and the courage of witnesses had revealed the truth. The next steps would involve final judgments and consequences. But for Tamara, the most important moment had already occurred. The world now knew what had really happened. The courtroom was unusually quiet as the final phase of the case began. Tamara Williams sat in the back, observing everything carefully, knowing that this would be the moment when the consequences of months of investigation and careful planning would finally take shape. Officer Daniel Reed, once confident and composed, now appeared tense and unsettled. The shift in his demeanor was noticeable, and even his attorney struggled to maintain a sense of control over the proceedings. The evidence that had been carefully collected, verified, and presented over the past weeks was now impossible to ignore. Tamara reflected briefly on the journey that had led to this point. The long hours, careful surveillance, and countless hours of documenting behavior had all been aimed at ensuring that truth would prevail. She had known from the beginning that exposing corruption within law enforcement would be challenging, especially when facing someone skilled at deception. But every detail she had gathered, every observation she had recorded, was now part of a clear, undeniable narrative. The prosecution began by summarizing the evidence in a structured, compelling way. Each piece of evidence, from the emails and financial records to the recorded conversations and witness testimonies, was highlighted, showing a clear pattern of misconduct. Reed's attempts to manipulate the truth were laid bare, and the courtroom could see the contrast between his previous confident statements and the facts now presented. Tamara listened carefully, noting the reactions of the jurors and the judge. The tension in the room was palpable, as everyone seemed to sense the weight of what was unfolding. One by one, witnesses were called to provide testimony. Many of them had been hesitant before, afraid of retaliation or of not being believed. But seeing Tamara's role as an FBI agent and the professionalism with which she had conducted her investigation gave them courage. They spoke clearly, providing first-hand accounts that supported the evidence already presented. The combined effect of these testimonies reinforced the prosecution's case and further weakened Reed's credibility. As the testimonies continued, Tamara noticed subtle shifts in the courtroom atmosphere. Members of the public who had been skeptical at first now leaned forward with interest, listening carefully to every detail. The jurors, who had initially struggled with the conflicting narratives, now appeared focused and attentive. Reed's supporters looked uneasy, and murmurs occasionally passed through the audience as the extent of his actions became more evident. Reed himself struggled to respond. His confident demeanor had been undermined by the clear, organized presentation of facts. His answers were hesitant, often contradicting the evidence, and he began to fidget in his seat. Tamara observed these signs closely, knowing that the psychological impact of being exposed in public was a powerful element in the case. The contrast between his earlier confidence and his current unease made the courtroom realize how much the truth could shift perceptions and accountability. During a critical moment, Tamara was called to provide direct testimony. She remained calm and professional, recounting her role in the investigation, the methods she had used, and the evidence she had gathered. She explained clearly how she had observed Reed's actions, documented discrepancies, and ensured that every step of her investigation complied with the law. Her explanations were precise, concise, and credible, leaving no room for doubt about her integrity or the accuracy of her findings. The impact of her testimony was immediate. Jurors nodded, witnesses looked reassured, and the judge maintained a serious, attentive demeanor. Reed, on the other hand, appeared more and more anxious. He glanced at his attorney for guidance, but there were no words that could undo the damage caused by the evidence and testimony. Tamara's presence, professionalism, and unwavering adherence to the truth had created a turning point that could not be reversed. The prosecution then presented a final set of evidence, tying together the financial records, recorded conversations, and documented instances of misconduct. Each element was connected clearly, showing how Reed had consistently acted against the law and attempted to manipulate outcomes for his own benefit. The courtroom was silent as the weight of the evidence settled over everyone present. It was clear that the defense's ability to challenge these findings was minimal, and Reed's credibility had been thoroughly compromised. As the day progressed, the judge addressed Reed directly. He emphasized the seriousness of the charges, the impact of his actions on the community, and the importance of accountability. Reed's face was pale, his earlier confidence entirely gone. The courtroom had witnessed the consequences of deception, manipulation, and abuse of authority, and the judge's words reinforced the magnitude of the situation. Tamara felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that her months of work had helped bring the truth to light. She had faced the challenge of working undercover, maintaining anonymity, and gathering evidence while navigating a complex web of fear, bias, and deception. Now, the impact of that work was clear. The case was no longer just about proving misconduct. It was about demonstrating that integrity, dedication, and professionalism could prevail against lies and corruption. Outside the courtroom, news of the case spread quickly. The story of a black woman FBI agent exposing a corrupt officer captured public attention. People discussed the bravery, persistence, and professionalism involved, highlighting the importance of holding those in positions of power accountable. Social media and local news outlets celebrated the outcome, emphasizing that truth and justice could be upheld even in challenging circumstances. Tamara took a moment to reflect on her personal journey. The months of preparation, observation, and careful documentation had been exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. There had been times when the challenges seemed overwhelming, when fear of exposure or failure threatened to cloud her focus. Yet she had persevered, guided by her commitment to justice and the belief that no one should be above the law. These reflections strengthened her resolve and deepened her appreciation for the work she did. As the final proceedings concluded, Reed was informed that he would face serious consequences for his actions. He would be subject to disciplinary measures, potential criminal charges, and public scrutiny. The courtroom was filled with a sense of resolution, a feeling that justice had been served and that the truth had prevailed. Tamara remained composed, understanding that while the outcome was significant, the broader impact on the community and the system was equally important. After the case, Tamara returned to her office, reviewing notes and reports from the investigation. She took the time to organize her findings, ensuring that every detail was properly documented for future reference. The work she had done would not only hold Reed accountable, but could also serve as a guide for other investigations into corruption, helping law enforcement maintain high standards of integrity. Her colleagues recognized her efforts, praising her professionalism, attention to detail, and courage. Yet Tamara remained humble. She understood that the work of justice was ongoing and that accountability was not achieved through a single case, but through consistent dedication, ethical conduct, and vigilance. She continued to mentor younger agents, sharing her experiences and emphasizing the importance of integrity, patience, and careful observation. The impact of the case extended beyond the courtroom. The community, once wary and skeptical of law enforcement, began to see that accountability was possible. Residents felt reassured that those who abused their power could be exposed and held responsible. The story of Tamara's investigation inspired others in the community and in law enforcement to prioritize honesty and transparency in their own roles. Tamara also reflected on the personal growth she had experienced through the investigation. She had learned to navigate complex human dynamics, to remain calm under pressure, and to balance emotional challenges with professional responsibilities. The experience strengthened her confidence, sharpened her analytical skills, and reinforced her commitment to justice. These lessons would stay with her throughout her career, influencing every case she would handle in the future. In the weeks that followed, Reed faced official consequences. Internal investigations confirmed the findings presented in court, and he was removed from active duty, subject to legal penalties, and publicly reprimanded. The community, the media, and law enforcement colleagues recognized the significance of holding a corrupt officer accountable, and Tamara's role as the investigator who exposed the truth was widely acknowledged in professional circles. Tamara took time to reflect privately on the journey. She thought about the months of undercover work, the careful observation, and the delicate balance of maintaining anonymity while gathering critical evidence. She considered the courage of witnesses, the importance of the legal system, and the broader implications of accountability. Each reflection reinforced her belief that integrity and professionalism were essential in law enforcement, and that dedication to truth could overcome even the most carefully constructed deceptions. The final outcome of the case was more than a personal victory. It was a demonstration of the importance of truth, accountability, and perseverance. Tamara had shown that even in the face of lies and manipulation, careful preparation, ethical conduct, and courage could ensure that justice prevailed. The story of the investigation, the courtroom revelations, and the eventual consequences for Reed became a lasting example of the power of integrity in action. As she continued her career, Tamara carried the lessons of this case with her. She remained committed to mentoring younger agents, supporting the community, and upholding the principles of honesty, fairness, and justice. The investigation had been challenging, emotionally demanding, and at times exhausting, but the outcome had reinforced her belief in the importance of her work and the impact one dedicated individual could have on the world around them. Tamara Williams had faced one of the most difficult cases of her career and emerged with the knowledge that justice, when pursued with care, diligence, and integrity, could not be denied. The community was safer, The system was more accountable, and the truth had prevailed. Her story would continue to inspire those around her, demonstrating the difference that courage, professionalism, and unwavering commitment to justice could make in the face of corruption and deceit.